Good morning, children. Now, in this session, when I'm explaining points, you have to take down in your notebook. So, let us begin with Chapter 3 Fiber to Fabric. Here, as you have seen in your previous session, Fiber to Fabric will cover these points, the topics here: fibers to yarn, then to fabric. Next, natural fibers: cotton, jute, flax, silk and wool. Synthetic fibers: polyester, nylon, acrylic. Cotton, jute, cotton and jute you are going to learn fibers obtained from plants. And wool and silk you are going to learn fibers obtained from animals. Wool from fleece of sheep or goat. Fleece means a thin outer layer of the skin with the hair. So that part of that skin, the upper layer, is called as, along with the hair, is called as fleece. And you are going to learn this. And hair of rabbits, yak, camels. Silk is obtained from cocoon of silkworm. So these are the main topics covered in this chapter. Next, now you are going to see this flow chart. You are going to draw the flow chart in your notebook. So fiber will undergo spinning. So spinning of yarn is done in two ways: weaving and knitting. Whereas non-woven fabric will not be spin. So over here there are two types: spinning and weaving and knitting. There are two types under spinning. So under spinning you are going to learn weaving and knitting. So knitting you are going to have weaving and knitting. Under that you are going to have a wet processing of the fabric, then finished fabric, garment manufacturing and garment, and fiber non-woven fabric also obtained. So you are going to draw this flow chart in your notebook very neatly. Next, what is yarn? So you have to define yarn. You have to take down these points in your notebook. Yarn is a spun thread that is made from the fibers in order to produce a fabric. So it was discussed in the earlier session. So you please take down this point if you have not taken so. Spinning cotton yarn. So how spinning of cotton yarn is done? Let us see. First of all, we will define spinning. You have to take down this definition in your notebook. Spinning is the process of constructing yarn from fibers, in which fibers from a huge heap of cotton wool are taken out and twisted, which brings them together to form a yarn. I hope you all are writing, children. Next, there are two major devices called takli, which is a hand spindle, and charkha, which is also a hand operated device. These are used for spinning. Make a note in your book. So the spinning of yarn on a bigger scale is done using spinning machine, following which these yarns are used to weave fabric. Khadi was the term used to denote clothes which were made from home spun yarn. So please make a note of this in your notebook, children. Now you can see on the left we can see a charka, and on the right we can see a simple takli. These are the device used for spinning. Charka remembers you. You can it reminds you of the independence struggle, where it was used, and it was used by Mahatma Gandhi. Uh, this is where he had launched Satyagraha, and then he used to use charkha. He used to promote Swadeshi goods. So he had taught Indian people to make their own clothes with the help of charkha. So you can relate it to history as well. Next, you can see yarn to fabric. How this process is done? There are two major ways using which yarn is converted to fabric, namely weaving and knitting. So these are the two ways where you can convert a yarn into fabric, because it's like a thread. So thread you have to now make into fabric. So let us see the process. Weaving, the process of entwining two sets of yarn simultaneously to make fabric is called weaving. The process is done using a loom, which can either be operated by hand or by a machine, which interlaces two sets of yarn at right angles to each other. So, I hope you're writing. You have to make all these points in your notebook very neatly. In this you can see, children, it's a device which is manually operated and weaving is done. So this device will have reeds. This is a cloth material where the yarn is arranged simultaneously in a at a right angle, and then weaving is done. It has a webbed shuttle and warp. So now shading, three steps over here shown: shading, picking and beating in. So you have to beat the yarn when you are weaving it. It's a manual device where you manually do weaving. So you have to just see this three steps here. Next, knitting is the process by which a single strand of yarn is used to make a piece of fabric. Socks, sweaters, mufflers, and a lot of other winter clothes are made of knitted fabrics. Knitting can be done by hand as well as by machines. So please take down these points. So knitting, you have socks, sweaters, mufflers. You all know, children, in winter we all wear. So these are the winter clothes where with the help of knitting you prepare, you make these products. I hope you are writing. Next, see how knitting is done manually with the help of two needles. So this is how you knit sweater, socks and many other products you get by knitting. So now we will see history of clothing material. Have you ever wondered what materials people used in ancient times for clothes? It appears that in those times people used the bark and big leaves of trees or animal skins and furs to cover themselves. So, in a very ancient time, people used to wear leaves, big leaves, and use the bark of trees. And also, some people used to use skins and furs to cover themselves. So, clothing has a history where you can trace back the history and see what type of clothing ancient people used to have. Next, we'll continue with the history. After people began to settle in agricultural communities, they learned to weave twigs and grass into mats and baskets. Vines, animal fleece, or hair were twisted together into a long strand. These were woven into fabrics. The early Indians wore fabrics made up of cotton that grew in the region near the river Ganga. So you can see the history over here of clothing, and in those days stitching was not known, so people simply drape the fabrics around different parts of their body. So if you trace back the history and you see, people used to just use a piece of fabric to cover themselves. So now even today you can see that concept, but it has now been advanced, like people have a different clothing, a piece of fabric converted into sari, dhoti, lungi or turban is used as an unstitched piece of fabric. So I hope you'll have taken down the points which was explained in this chapter. So we are going to end the session now, and in my next session we are going to discuss textual question and answer. Thank you, and we will end for the session. Have a nice day, children.
Weaving fun. Explore and observe. Let us first look at the procedure to build a weaving frame. The weaving frame is very easy to make. There are just 4 parts that you need to assemble. Look at these wide sheets. Each wide sheet has 2 slits. Take one wide sheet and insert a thin bar into one of the slits present in the wide sheet. Similarly, insert the other thin bar into the other slit present in the same wide sheet. Insert the free ends of the thin bars into the slits present in the other wide sheet. Now, hold the rectangular frame and press both wide sheets so that the frame becomes rigid and firm. Your weaving frame is now ready. Explore it. Now that we have built a weaving frame, let's learn how to use it for weaving yarn. To begin, unwind one of the woolen threads. This woolen thread is going to be our yarn. Now, look at the white sheets in the weaving frame. Both sheets have a line of screws fixed on them. Tie one end of the thread to the screw present at a corner on one of the wide sheets. Next, run the thread from one wide sheet to the opposite wide sheet and loop it around the screw so that it is exactly opposite the screw where the thread is tied. Make sure the thread is tightly stretched between the two screws. Pull the thread if it is not tightly stretched. Then, run the thread back to the first wide sheet and loop it around the next screw. Every time you loop the thread around two opposite screws, tightly stretch the thread. Similarly, keep running the thread from one end to the other by winding it around the screws. Observe that we are arranging these yarns lengthwise on the weaving frame. These yarns arranged along the length of the weaving frame are called warp. Once the warp is complete, tie the thread to the last screw at the corner and cut the extra thread with scissors. Look at the wrap. If the distance between the yarns of the warp is unequal, adjust them so that they are spaced equally. Next, we will weave the yarn across the warp. For this, we need to take another long thread and tie its one end to the warp near any one of the corners and the other end to the eye of a needle. Next, pass the needle across the warp by leaving alternate threads of the warp above and below the needle. Now, pull the needle from the other end of the warp. Pull the thread as well. Next, use a comb to pull the interlaced thread to one side. The yarn that we are weaving across the warp is called weft. Similarly, pass the needle and thread in the opposite direction across the warp. Now, repeat the process of interlacing threads of warp and weft. You need to weave till the interlacing is complete. When the interlacing of the warp and weft yarns is complete, remove the warp yarns from the screws on both wide sheets. Finally, pull each thread towards one end. The plain weave fabric is ready. Isn't weaving very easy? Now that you know how to weave plain weave fabric, let's weave fabrics of different patterns. Can you think of some new patterns for weaving fabrics? Draw the patterns in your worksheet and then try to weave as per the pattern. Take the pictures of fabrics woven as per the patterns, print them and stick them in your worksheet.